Arvin's Creature. From the book Rula's Not Stupid Anymore and Other Short Horror Stories by Grant Crowther. Illustrated by Yornelys. Narrated by Sonny Swinhart. In the heart of a dense, haunting forest, where the trees towered like monstrous sentinels and the shadows whispered secrets of forgotten lore, stood a grim, solitary cabin. It was an outpost of humanity, defiant against the brooding wilderness, home to a man as fearsome as the forest itself. His name was Arvin, a lumberjack by trade, a solitary figure scarred by life's cruel hand. He was a formidable sight to behold, his towering figure a silhouette of dread against the setting sun. The rhythmic fall of his axe, the relentless metronome, echoed ominously through the dark expanse of the woods, a grim melody of solitude and toil. Arvin was a figure of terror, not just imposing in size and strength, but also imposing in his visage. His face, a grotesque canvas of weather-beaten lines and battle scars, was often pulled into a chilling scowl that would make even the bravest hearts quiver. His gnarled, calloused hands, every bit as hard as the timber he hewed, were a testament to a life of grueling toil and brutal encounters. No woman dared to share his life. No children graced his hearth, for his appearance and refuge were as forbidding as the wilderness he called home. The clandestine meetings with the town butcher offered a grim distraction from his harsh existence. The two weathered men, both hardened souls, often shared a drink whenever Arvin trundled into town at night, delivering the bodies of whatever beast unfortunately found its way into Arvin's traps. Adept at the hunt, Arvin set elaborate snares and coil-clamp traps in the darkest corners of the forest, luring and capturing the fiercest of beasts. The sinister thrill of the hunt and the prize of the coins it fetched added a dark spice to his otherwise monotonous life. The wealthier denizens of the town, drawn to the macabre allure of the wild game he traded, paid a pretty penny for the taste of the exotic and forbidden meats from the forest. In the shadowed realm that Arvin called home, suffering was not merely observed. It was the cloth from which the tapestry of life was woven, an integral thread in the fabric of daily existence. Nature, in all her unyielding majesty, had revealed to him the eternal dance of death and rebirth, predator and prey, each step a testament to the cruelty that permeated this wooden world. Amongst the towering timbers and under the watchful eyes of the ancient oaks, Arvin had been a silent witness to the ballet of brutality that played out in the gloom. Once, he had stumbled upon a tragic tableau of two mighty stags, their magnificent antlers interlocked in a fatal embrace, their majestic heads bowed under the weight of their mutual imprisonment. After what were likely days of struggle, the two had finally collapsed to their deaths in exhaustion. On another foray into the depths of the forest, his path had crossed that of a desperate mother bear, her hunger overcoming the maternal instincts that should have protected her young. From a far-off distance, across a rocky ravine, Arvin had watched as the emaciated mother bear turned on her cub, devouring it as its sibling looked on, frozen in horror. Yet another memory etched itself into Arvin's mind, that of a lone wolf, its once proud visage marred by the scars of battle, left to die by its very own pack. its ravaged face a testament to the savagery of its kind. Now the wolf lived a pitiful existence, limping through the forest, dragging its useless hind quarters. It had sustained itself by eating insects and other small creatures on the forest floor. And then there was the haunting image of the wild cat, its savage instincts on full display as it feasted upon a hapless deer fawn. The baby's small head had been ensnared in the hollow of an ancient tree trunk. With an almost casual cruelty, the cat had ripped open the fawn's belly, pulling out its intestines, all the while indifferent to the heart-wrenching bleats of its victim. Such was the merciless world that Arvin had come to know, a place where nature's laws were written in blood. So, when the tortured wail of another of the forest's inhabitants pierced the air that night, Arvin remained unmoved. His seasoned ears had grown accustomed to the multitude of cries that echoed through the shadowy woods, and the particularly distinct guttural groans of this unknown beast did little to perturb his steady nerves. Yet, the experienced trapper knew to tread lightly, for the danger was always a possibility. With the stealth of a cat, Arvin made his way towards the source of the tumult, guided by the symphony of snapping twigs and thrashings of what must be an immense creature. There, nestled in the heart of the forest, lay one of Arvin's most formidable contraptions, a spring trap of gargantuan proportions, its iron jaws capable of holding captive the most fearsome of adversaries. As Arnhem approached, he knew that whatever creature lay ensnared within its grip, its fate was sealed, for none had ever escaped the unyielding embrace of this deadly device. Clutching his trusty axe in one mighty hand and a keen-edged knife in the other, Arvin steadied himself for whatever grotesquerie awaited him in the murk of the forest. His past escapades had seen him bring down the most bizarre and unimagined creatures, fetching him a handsome price from the fat and decadent elites who held their sumptuous feasts in high esteem, each course more extravagant than the last, in a relentless competition of opulence. And so, with the heart of a hunter and the light-footedness of a fox, Arvin plunged into the murky underbrush, every rustle of the leaves and groan of the branches serving to heighten his sense of anticipation. Soon, the origin of the chilling wails was within his view, revealing a sight that would have any greenhorn hunter turning tail and fleeing for their life. But not Arvin. His eyes widened, not in fear, but in incredulous awe, as they beheld the monstrous entity ensnared within the unyielding clutches of his colossal trap. There, before him, writhed a nightmarish freak, a fantastical blend of human and goat, as if plucked from the most sinister depths of ancient mythology. The creature's lower extremities were a testament to its caprine lineage, powerful and muscular, ending in hooves that pawed at the earth in a futile attempt to escape its painful confinement. Towering above its grotesque visage, a pair of formidable spiraled horns, their razor-sharp tips glinting malevolently in the ethereal light of the moon. In contrast between the creature's lower bestial half and its upper human-like torso was startling to say the least. Her torso was that of a human female, her bare flesh an incongruous element in her otherwise monstrous visage. The grotesque human likeness brought forth a macabre question. Would the debauched elites even deign to feast upon the flesh of such a being? The very thought of consuming a creature with human features was horrifying. Engulfed in a nightmarish ordeal, the creature writhed and thrashed in its metallic prison, its leg impaled by the cruel fangs of the trap that anchored it to the forest floor. Each agonized howl that escaped its lips seemed to weave an invisible shroud of dread that hung heavy over the shadowed woods. Yet Arnhem remained resolute, the specter of fear banished to the recesses of his mind, sealed behind the impenetrable walls of his battle-hardened spirit and a lifetime spent walking hand in hand with peril. He regarded the enigmatic beast before him, caught in the internal tug-of-war between his intrigue for the anomaly that was the creature and the grim realities of his livelihood. When the creature lifted its hellish eyes to meet his, any inkling of sympathy that might have taken root in his heart was swiftly expunged. In its place arose the cold, calculating mindset of the hunter as Arvin began to plot his next course of action. She was too massive and still too healthy to approach. One swipe from those claws could mean death, but the trap had hit her artery. Blood was coming from the wound at an alarming rate, creating a dark pool beneath her. Arvin watched the horrific scene with a detachment that only years of experience could endure one to. He had been the harbinger of death too many times, watching the light fade from the eyes of too many creatures to be moved by the suffering before him. His eyes had long turned into a chunk of ice, as cold and as unyielding as the winters of the woods he called home. The creature, trapped and bleeding, locked eyes with him. The stare she returned was loaded with a primal hatred and terror, a promise of death should she break free. In the abyss of her dark eyes, Arvin saw a fierce, unbroken spirit, a mirror to his own hardened soul. The relentless iron jaws dug deeper into her flesh with each struggle, each futile attempt to free herself. She would bleed out. It was inevitable. He just had to wait. There was a cruel simplicity to it all. The cold equation of life and death. The survival of the fittest. The inevitable cycle of predator and prey. The release of death would find her in its own unforgiving time. If she looked weak enough and it was safe, he would put her out of her misery, but only then. Under the spectral gaze of the moon, the woods bore silent witness to the grim tableau, and Arvin, as unyielding as the forest around him, stood guard over the dying creature, waiting for death to claim its next due. In the throes of her final moments, the creature let out a guttural cry. It was a pained sound, a sorrowful mix of growl and whimper that echoed mournfully in the silence of the night. Her eyes, still sharp despite her impending doom, darted frantically in front of her to something that lay just out of reach. Arlen followed her gaze, watching as she extended her arm in a final, desperate bid toward a hollow in a tree just beyond her reach. The pitiful sight was a stark revelation, a shockingly cruel twist in the drama before him. A maternal cry from mother to child had been in that dying wail, a plea interwoven with despair and love that echoed in the darkest corners of Arvin's hardened heart. Instinctively, he understood what it signified. He approached her body, and with one fluid, simple movement, he slit her throat. As he knelt down beside her body remained still. She had already succumbed to death. Arvin's gaze was drawn to the mysterious shadows of the large tree hollow. Peering into the dim interior, he discovered a heart-wrenching tableau. Nestled within the confines of the hollow rested a makeshift cradle fashioned from woven twigs. Within this rustic cradle, his fears of the tragedy he suspected were brought to life. Gazing up at him, eyes wide with innocence and terror, were three diminutive figures, miniature facsimiles of the monstrous creature now ensnared in his trap. They were a bizarre yet pitiable blend of goat and human, their small faces etched with the terror of their mother's final agonizing cries. Despite their unsettling appearance, there was something undeniably poignant about the tiny beings. Their odd features, a grotesque mixture of the fantastical and the human, were tempered by their tender age, giving them an otherworldly charm that tugged at Arvin's heartstrings. This awakened within him a flicker of sympathy and an unexpected surge of protectiveness. The sight of these innocent, trembling creatures, whose lives were ripped apart even before they had begun, struck a chord within the gruff man. It reminded him, albeit in a twisted, haunting manner, of the cyclical nature of life and death he had come to accept in the woods. But for the first time, it was a cycle he found himself questioning. As a flicker of pity began to kindle in Arvin's chest, it was swiftly quelled by the pragmatic survival instincts that had been his bedrock in these untamed woods. His gaze, once a tumultuous blend of revulsion and intrigue, now crystallized into a steely resolve as he weighed his options. Life in the forest was a grueling test of endurance, and recent times had seen him falter under its weight. The previous year had been particularly cruel, robbing him of his health and, consequently, his ability to earn a living. With no other recourse, he had found himself on the doorstep of the town's clergy, hat in hand, seeking financial assistance. The clergy, for all their piety, had extended a loan to him with interest rates that bordered on usury. Gratitude for their timely assistance was now overshadowed by the looming specter of missed payments and the draconian penalties that awaited him should he default. Penalties that included the unthinkable prospect of imprisonment. His present situation, dire as it was, had left him with little room for the luxuries of morality or pity. And so, as he stood before the enormous creature and its diminutive offspring, he couldn't help but regard them as the godsend they were, a means to extricate himself from the financial mire he had found himself ensnared in. The heft of the mother beast's lifeless form was not lost on Arvin, nor was the potential bounty it represented. He understood all too well the decadent predilections of the town's wealthiest denizens. Exotic meats were the currency of opulence, a tangible manifestation of status that they'd vied with each other to showcase. Here, in the grotesque form of this terrifying carcass, lay the epitome of the exotic, a terrifying treasure trove that held the promise of a tidy windfall, enough to see him through the lean months ahead. With a world-weary exhale, Arvin bent down to retrieve the rustic cradle nestled in the hollow tree. His wagon, the essential requisite for transporting the hefty carcass of the mother beast, was parked in his cabin a fair distance away. In the meantime, he decided to take the fawns with him, their ethereal innocence a stark contrast to the macabre tableau that had unfolded. Hoisting the cradle, he commenced the trek toward the dense woodland towards his home. Every so often, his gaze would be drawn downwards to the fawns that gazed up at him with eyes wide and brimming with an innocence that belied their monstrous lineage. The weight of their gaze was almost as tangible as the weight of the cradle in his arms, a silent plea that pierced the veil of his jaded heart. Once home, he arranged a makeshift bed in a secluded corner of his kitchen for the creatures. He lined an old wooden crate with hay and soft, worn-out clothes that had outlived their use. It was a poor excuse for a bed, but it was the best he could offer. As he laid the strange fawns in their new home, they made mysterious chirping noises that filled the usually silent cabin. At first, they were sounds of fear, but gradually the chirps became more curious, and the fawns showed interest in their new surroundings. He watched them, their innocent wonder stirring a strange sense of responsibility within him. Shaking off the unfamiliar feeling, he headed out to fetch his cart, leaving them behind. When he returned to the lifeless body of the beast, he hoisted it up onto his old rickety cart. The body, now limp and lifeless, lay grotesquely sprawled, its limbs hanging over the edges of the cart. Each bump on the path seemed to jolt the corpse, making it seem eerily alive, a morbid puppet dancing to the tune of death. As Arvin made his way through the thick foliage, a strange disquiet settled upon him, unsettling in its novelty. With every step that carried him further from the sanctuary of his cabin, an invisible cord seemed to tug at his heartstrings, compelling him to return. The adrenaline-fueled excitement that had once been an integral part of the hunt now felt distant, its intensity diminished and replaced by an overwhelming compulsion to rush back to the three small beings who had, quite unexpectedly, become his charge. In his mind's eye, he pictured them huddled together, their eyes wide pools of innocence, fear, and confusion, strangers in a land that was as foreign to them as they were to it. The raw vulnerability etched in their expressions had kindled within him a protective instinct, an almost paternal desire to shield them from the harsh realities of their existence and offer them a haven of safety and comfort. Ensconced within the inky veil of night, Arvin guided his cart, laden with its grim and grotesque payload, through a winding pathway toward the town's outskirts. He had captured strange creatures before. The forest was indeed home to many curious entities, and tales of the paranormal abound in these lands. 3 years ago, he had ensnared a frog so large he could hardly lift it. Its eyes shone with a pink glow that, Arvin swore, had caused him to slip into a trance-like state. He had been forced to cover the fantastical reptile with a sack to shield himself from its gaze. On another occasion, he had encountered a giant badger, a beast of legends with claws longer than Arvin's own fingers. It was larger than a wild boar, and only fell after taking 5 arrows. But by far, the greatest prize was the mutant wildcat he had snared more than 5 years prior. Its form was so strange that even now he struggled to recall its shape. A long, snake-like body with 6 legs and fangs so enormous that the king himself was said to have purchased its head, now displayed in the royal gallery. The head was the stuff of nightmares. Each creature he had taken to the butcher had earned him a sum of money that exceeded a regular year's worth of earnings. The reward for this latest creature was sure to be even more substantial. The village that Arvin found himself nearing was ancient, its history etched into the fabric of its existence. Nestled upon a forested mountain peak and fortified by towering stone walls, it was a relic of the past, a testament to the bygone days of a vast empire that was now in its twilight. The landscape that approached its gates was marked by terraced farms that ascended the slopes, a mosaic of agriculture that contrasted starkly with the dense woodland that cocooned it. In its heyday, the empire was a robust entity, its borders patrolled and protected by legions of well-funded monarchs. As the years wore on, its robustness waned, leaving its furthest reaches, including this mountainous outpost, somewhat forgotten and neglected. The only reason it had not been completely forsaken was its location atop an enormous underground reservoir of salt, a valuable commodity that enriched a selected few. The wealth derived from this natural resource funded the lifestyles of a handful of elites and clergy who took up residence in the ancient palaces and monasteries that were ensconced behind those formidable stone walls. Outside of this sanctum, The less affluent, the tradesmen and farmers, eked out a living, their abodes clinging to the exterior of the forest walls like barnacles to a ship's hull. It was a taxing climb for Arvin as he hauled his heavily laden wagon beneath the starlit night sky. Gradually, the silhouette of half-timbered houses emerged, their aged facades lit by flickering lights of lanterns that hung from rusted hooks. These structures, though worn by the passage of time, were redolent with stories from days of yore, standing as silent witnesses to the harmonious coexistence of civilization and the encircling wilderness. Above this tableau, imposing in its authority, the town's governing body and its clergy occupied towering edifices that loomed over the walls, their penetrating gaze constantly surveying the hamlet below, ever vigilant for any deviation from their imposing righteous path. Adjacent to the gate was the butcher's shop, a quaint two-story half-timber building that exuded an air of rustic charm. Its thick wooden beams framed walls of white stucco and brick, and hanging from its frontage was a sign that bore the painted image of a sumptuous ham hock, a visual enticement that even the illiterate could not fail to comprehend. This establishment was owned by Arvin's sole friend, Tibor, though to refer to the relationship between the two-hearted men as a friendship might be a stretch. Yet, for all its apparent adherence to ancient customs and its rustic appeal, the town harbored a dark secret. Its elite, comprised of aristocrats and clergy alike, were united in their pursuit of decadent pleasures, their taste buds titillated by exotic and forbidden meats. This gross indulgence stood in stark opposition to the holy vows they purportedly upheld, a hypocrisy that was all the more stark given the strange bounty that the surrounding forest seemed to provide. As darkness descended, the wealthiest among them satiated their gluttonous desires, partaking in an Epicurean sin that the clergy conveniently chose to ignore, often joining in the debauchery themselves. In this intricate dance of sin and secrecy, the butcher played an indispensable role. This strange creature was not the first, nor would be the last, to make its way to the butchering table. These forests were filled with undiscovered beasts, but this one was more ominous than most, and its unmistakably humanoid form would make it particularly sinful for consumption. Tibor, the epitome of cruelty wrapped in human skin, was such a carcass's trusted facilitator. His lanky form, draped in shadows, resided here near the town's gate, making his sinister shop conveniently located for such a discreet delivery. As he saw Arvin's silhouette emerge from the darkness, Tibor's unsettlingly asymmetrical face broke into a carnivorous grin. As Arvin's horse clattered to a halt in front of Tibor's establishment, the butcher emerged from the shadowy innards of his shop, a flickering lantern in his hand casting monstrous shadows on the surrounding stone walls. His long, skeletal fingers curled around the door handle, eyes glinting with a cold, avaricious anticipation that was all too familiar to Arvin. "Evening, Arvin," Tibor drawled, his voice gravelly and as unsettling as the eeriness that hung in the air. "Looks like you have something mighty interesting for me tonight." He scurried to the side of the building where he opened the double doorway leading to his meat storage. Arvin, the gruff stoicism that characterized his demeanor unbroken, nodded in silent affirmation and followed, pushing the overloaded cart over the threshold into the cold stone room. Here, massive hooks hung from the ceiling for placing large animals on, to be drained of their blood before butchering. Arvin helped Tibor lift the body and hang it from one of the hooks. Its gigantic length hindered it from being totally suspended. Its long hooved legs touched the floor. "Have you ever seen such a creature?" Arvin asked quietly, looking in reverence at the great beast before them. Hanging upright like a ghoulish puppet, the creature's head flopped forwards, hiding the slash mark from Arvin's blade on its throat.
I have never seen one, but indeed I have heard of such a creature. Have you ever heard of the Ordog?
Tibor asked incredulously. No, I have heard many strange tales, but nothing about a creature like this one, Arvin replied, intrigued. He leaned against the stone walls of the meat locker and listened to Tibor's tale.
They say the first Ordog was born a woman, exceedingly ugly, a mutant. She led an unfortunate life of loneliness and despair. She became so desperate for a child of her own that she delved into the dark arts. There, she found a way to bear a child without a man, but with the devil himself. After performing a ritual opening a doorway to hell, she became pregnant. When the child was born, it was so enormous that it killed her during labor. Those who bore witness to it said it was half goat and half man. Not knowing its demonic heritage, the priests declared it immoral to murder the creature. So instead, it was abandoned, left in the forest to die. From that creature grew the Ordog, standing taller than the tallest man and as strong as 3 combined. It has claws larger than a bear's and walks on hooved legs. Its face is a mix of goat and man. Horns spring from its head, and a long tail protrudes from its rear. That, my friend, is what we see before us now.
Arvin was astounded and did not know how to respond. He stared at the corpse hanging before him. Indeed, it had massive claws and horns, and the tail could be seen dangling from behind it. He wondered if Tibor could make up such a tale just to scare him, but thought better of it. Magnifying the rare and powerful nature of the beast would only increase its value, which meant paying Arvin a greater sum. This would not be in Tibor's best interest. He surmised that indeed he must be telling the truth. Arvin paused, and for a moment became fearful of the 3 fawns back in his cabin. But the memory of their cute little faces and the innocence of those eyes dispelled him of any such worries. Returning to his natural cool demeanor, Arvin laughed. You will have to pay me a pretty penny for her then. He smiled wryly, pleased with his witty response. The negotiation that followed was a dance of 2 seasoned practitioners. The butcher, his eyes gleaming with anticipation, offered Arvin a handsome sum, his sinewy fingers stroking his purse thoughtlessly. Arvin, an old hand at this grim trade, held out for more, his counteroffer measured and unyielding. Once the business proceedings had concluded, the 2 men vacated the confines of the icy meat locker, taking solace in the comparatively more hospitable environment of the butcher shop, as was their custom. Seated comfortably, Arvin took the opportunity to regale Tibor with the tale of his extraordinary encounter with the beast. He spared no detail, vividly depicting the heart-wrenching wails that had first alerted him to the creature's presence, and subsequently his discovery of the behemoth sprawled out on the forest floor, cruelly ensnared by his bear trap. The crescendo of his narrative was the revelation of the 3 fawn offspring, secreted within the hollow of the tree. This crucial bit of information acted as a catalyst to Tibor's already fervent interest, stoking the fires of his avarice. His eyes alight with a greedy gleam, Tibor promptly doubled his original offer for the fawns, his voice betraying the intensity of his desire through its tremulous tone. Despite the allure of the proffered sum, Arvin's resolve remained unyielding, and he declined the offer.
You're certain?
Tibor inquired. An edge of incredulity sharpened his voice.
Let's not forget the substantial debt you've incurred with those avaricious clergy. Even with this sum, you scarcely make a dent in your outstanding balance.
Arvin's response was terse and final. This will suffice to keep them at bay. Accepting the futility of his entreaties, Tibor gave a resigned nod. Their camaraderie concluded, Arvin bade him farewell, stepping out into the crisp night air. Upon his return, Arvin's wagon was void of its macabre cargo, and his pockets were weighed down by the heft of the coins he carried. A twinge of guilt flitted through his heart at the thought of the 3 little fawns nestled in their makeshift bed. The irony of having sold their mother to the butcher, only to return to them as their new guardian, did not escape him, and a sense of self-disgust tinged what should have been a celebratory evening. As he opened the door to his cabin, a chorus of coos and chirps greeted him. There, in the dim light, 3 small or-dog fawns lay nestled amidst hay and old clothes. His heart was tugged at the sight of their odd hybrid forms, a fantastical manifestation of the folklore narrated to him by the butcher. Their tiny goat eyes, luminescent in the flickering lantern light, watched him with a mixture of reverence and curiosity, capturing his every move with an intensity that was both endearing and unnerving. In the subsequent days, Arvin found himself at the doorstep of the town abbot. He handed over the lion's share of his hard-earned money into the greedy, claw-like hands of the clergyman. As he did so, a cynical thought crossed his mind. Had this very man feasted on the flesh of the Ordog mother? In his heart, he knew the answer. Back at the cabin, Arvin adapted to his new role as caregiver. He discovered that the fawns had a penchant for goat milk and took to the feeding bottles he had used in the past for his own goats. They would spend the daylight hours nestled in their bed, lost in slumber, only to awaken as the sun dipped below the horizon. In the evening, he would cradle them one by one, feeding them as the others frolicked and bleated on the cabin floor, basking in the warmth of the fire. This new regime became Arvin's routine. His days were consumed by the back-breaking labor of felling towering trees, their colossal trunks chopped and stacked, ready for trade. His nimble fingers worked his traps, capturing a variety of animals, their pelts and flesh destined for the nearby town. Yet, as night fell, the peculiar sight of his cabin, filled with these mythical creatures, their otherworldly features illuminated by the firelight, imbued him with a newfound sense of purpose. With gentle hands, Arvin brought the feeding bottle to the tiny, waiting mouths of the fawns. Their diminutive lips greedily latched onto the bottle, their small bodies quivering with the eagerness of the nourishment they so desperately required. In those moments, their eyes, wide and innocent, would lock onto his, creating an intimate tableau that, to an outsider, would have appeared comically tender. Here was this fearsome trapper, a towering figure amidst the shadows and whispers of the ominous forest, tenderly nursing 3 creatures of folklore, demonic beings, so they claimed, with a patience and calmness that bordered on paternal. Before the arrival of these odd little fawns, Arvin's life had been a monochrome of bleak practicality, a life measured in the simple metrics of survival. Now, his world was punctuated by the quiet companionship of these peculiar orphans he had unexpectedly found himself caring for. Beneath the rough exterior and harsh demeanor of the trapper lay a surprisingly nurturing side, a facet of his personality that he himself hadn't been aware of. As the days merged into weeks, Arvin discovered, much to his surprise, a growing attachment to the little beings. Their vulnerability and dependence awoke within him a profound and primal protective instinct, one that he hadn't known existed. He who had never owned a pet was now the guardian of beings with an intelligence that gleamed in their eyes, beings that clung to life with a desperation that resounded with him, for it was a feeling that mirrored his own struggle for survival in this harsh, unforgiving world. In an ironic and cruel twist of fate, Arvin awoke one dawn to the horrifying realization that his cherished wood-cutting tools and meticulously crafted traps had vanished. Some audacious thief had exploited the cover of darkness, leaving Arvin bereft of the very instruments that defined his existence. Initial shock swiftly transformed into a slow-burning fury, the intense blade of indignation glaring from his eyes. Arvin, with his forest-honed instincts, could weather many of the wild's hardships. But these tools and traps were not mere instruments. They were the lifelines that anchored him to his vocation. The cost to replace them would be exorbitant, especially under the heavy weight of his outstanding debt to the clergy. Now deprived of his primary means of income, the icy fingers of desperation began to grip him. Cornered by his circumstances, a heart-rending choice loomed before him. The memory of the butcher's insidious proposal, the ravenous gleam that danced in his eyes at the prospect of the fawn's tender flesh, reverberated darkly in Arvin's mind. The very thought was chilling, but it also presented an immediate respite from his predicament. Rationality and cold pragmatism edged out emotion. With a heart as heavy as lead and a grim resolve, he selected one of the 3 Ordog fawns. The fawn's eyes, alight with innocence and trust as Arvin lifted it, pierced his soul like the sharpest of daggers. Yet he stilled himself against the guilt that threatened to overwhelm him. In the brutal dance of survival, as he'd observed in the very nature around him, sacrifices were inevitable. This was the grim logic with which he justified the agonizing choice he was compelled to make. He traded the minuscule creature to the butcher, receiving in return a substantial sum of money, sufficient to replace his pilfered tools and traps. With his task accomplished, Arvin retraced his steps to his abode, only to be met with the disoriented and terrified wails of the remaining fawns that pierced the stillness of the nocturnal forest. Gathering them into his robust arms, their minuscule bodies quivered against his rough exterior, serving as a stark reminder of the price exacted by survival. From that day forth, a specter of guilt dogged Arvin's footsteps. The vacant space in their little bed, where the fawn once slumbered, served as an unrelenting reminder of his treacherous act against his trusting brood. Their destinies were irrevocably entwined with his in this unforgiving world, and he had chosen to be their guardian. How then could he have dispatched one to the butcher's cruel blade? These were the ponderings that emanated from his sentimental side. Yet his pragmatic self offered a different perspective, equating his act to that of a mother deer abandoning one of its own in the face of a looming predator, a harsh yet necessary sacrifice for the greater good of the remaining kin. This was the logic that underpinned his decision. And so, amidst the shadows of the menacing forest, Arvin and the 2 remaining fawns trudged on, their very existence emblematic of nature's harsh dance for survival. Months passed and life was good. The fawns flourished, their burgeoning physiques a testament to their Ordog lineage. They had seamlessly woven themselves into the fabric of Arvin's existence, their presence a comforting anomaly amidst the adversities that characterized his days. Yet, the wilderness had a penchant for dashing hopes and dreams to ruins in the blink of an eye. Arvin's humble abode, a rudimentary structure born out of necessity, boasted a singular valuable asset: a stove. Essential for both sustenance and warmth during the biting winter months. This stove, a relic salvaged from the town in years past, was the linchpin of his survival during the frigid season. Unfortunately, on one fateful evening, an ancient, dilapidated stove committed an act of treachery. A small burning ember escaped its confines through a hole in its belly, landing on the wooden floorboards. The smoldering coal ignited a conflagration that quickly enveloped the cabin in an inferno, all while Arvin and the fawns were deep in slumber. Awoken by the roaring flames, Arvin found all attempts to douse the fire futile. Faced with no alternative, he salvaged what few valuables he could lay his hands on, and cradling the fawns in the wooden crate, fled the incinerating cabin. By dawn, his home was reduced to ashes. Winter's icy grip was fast approaching. He could rely on the forest's bounty for timber to reconstruct his cabin, but procuring roof tiles, a stove, and rudimentary furniture necessitated funds. His dire circumstances once again directed his gaze toward the fawns. The mere thought of parting with another was akin to a dagger to his heart, a gut-wrenching sacrifice he wished to avoid. Yet, the allure of a snug home and the prospect of hot meals in the face of winter's brutal onslaught proved too seductive to resist. With his heart encased in a shell of stoicism, he made his decision. Another fawn was handed over to the butcher. The unsuspecting creature, with trusted eyes wide, was placed upon the butcher's slab. The coins that filled Arvin's pockets in exchange ensured the procurement of a new stove, bed, and roof, thereby securing his survival through the impending winter. Yet, the haunting image of the fawn's eyes, filled with a mixture of trust and betrayal as he laid on the butcher's table, was etched in Arvin's memory, an indelible mark that would remain with him for the remainder of his days. Upon his return to the makeshift tent that served as their interim refuge after the tragic fire, Arvin was greeted by the searching eyes of the lone fawn he'd come to endearingly call Cody. Those eyes, vast wells of innocence, reflected bewilderment at the sudden absence of his brother. Arvin, reciprocating the graze with unwavering determination, silently conveyed a promise birthed from their shared hardships. The sacrifices made, trading the lives of Cody's kin for the security of their future, weighed heavily upon him. But from that moment onward, Arvin committed to an unspoken oath to place Cody's well-being above all else. Using the acquired funds, he began crafting a modest cabin, ensuring they'd face the winter's embrace shielded from its harshest touch. As the two rebuilt their home and their lives, Cody flourished. Arvin couldn't help but be struck by the fawn's uncanny aptitude, an almost human-like awareness glimmering in his eyes. Cody exhibited an understanding of gestures and commands that surpassed Arvin's wildest expectations for this uncanny amalgamation of animal and human. Cody's gaze followed Arvin with an intriguing blend of curiosity and mischief as he wielded his axe to collect lumber, or while meticulously laying traps amidst the trees encircling their abode. The fledgling fawn's remarkable agility was evident in every step he took on his cloven feet. His upper limbs, shaped in the mold of human arms and hands, had burgeoned into powerful appendages, far surpassing the strength one would expect in a human body. As the months rolled by, Cody's digits grew into formidable claws, necessitating frequent trimmings by Arvin. His nimbleness and velocity were a marvel, effortlessly keeping pace with Arvin as they navigated the dense tapestry of their wooden world. In the tranquility of the evening, as shadows blended into an encroaching obscurity, Arvin would lounge by the comforting flames, with Cody nestled at his feet, often engaged with the simple wooden blocks that Arvin had crafted for him. Arvin's voice would weave the ancient tales once relayed to him by his own father. Bathed in the golden flicker of the firelight, Cody's eyes would shine with lucid understanding, his mental faculties mirroring those of a human child, marked only by the absence of speech. As each story reached its zenith, Cody would erupt in a cascade of delighted claps, his small hands meeting a gleeful acclamation. As the narrative drew to its close, he would gently tug at Arvin's pant leg, a silent plea for another tale to fill the hushed nocturnal air. This mute communion, rich with unspoken gestures and implied emotions, stood as a testament to the intricate and indescribable bond that had blossomed between them. Time, with its eternal dance of seasons, wrought a profound metamorphosis in Arvin. The once barren wastelands of his heart were now awash with the budding warmth of newfound sentiments. Cody, his steadfast confidant and surrogate offspring, was the catalyst that precipitated this transformation. However, the ghosts of his past choices were inexorable, casting long shadows over his spirit. The acute sting of regret and the overwhelming surge of self-reproach that swamped him whenever he gazed upon Cody were nearly insurmountable. The realization that he had traded the lives of Cody's siblings, who would undoubtedly have been as extraordinary as Cody himself, in pursuit of his own welfare, was sufficient to bring a surge of pain deep within his gut. In the face of these tumultuous emotions, Arvin found solace in the rhythm of their shared existence. The once burdensome tasks of survival now took on a new hue, their silent understanding illuminating their path forward. Together, they forged a life suffused with gentle happiness in their woodland sanctuary. Arvin found delight in the simple acts of making meals, maintaining their humble abode, and collaborating in their daily endeavors. The once burdensome tasks required for survival morphed into opportunities for shared growth and camaraderie. Their existence, harmoniously synchronized, became a beautiful dance of trust and reliance upon each other. In the twilight hours, when the day's toll had come to an end, Arvin would sit by the fire's glow, his eyes fixed on Cody's earnest gaze. The flames cast dancing shadows on their faces, the hushed crackle of burning logs accompanying the unspoken conversations they shared. Arvin would hold Cody's hand, his touch a testament to his remorse, silently asking for forgiveness for a deed he could never admit to aloud. As Cody matured into adolescence, the fabric of their once straightforward existence became threaded with complexity. The isolation that had once cradled them now became a burdensome shroud enveloping the maturing creature's growing self-awareness. A poignant realization of his unique place in the world and the solitary path it necessitated became increasingly troubling to him. Arvin, assuming the role of both father and mentor, revealed to Cody the necessity of their concealment and the perilous consequences should they be discovered. In a harsh yet indispensable lesson, Arvin covertly led Cody into the stillness of the nighttime town, revealing the gruesome trophies of beastly heads adorning the walls of the town's elite. He did his utmost to explain the harsh realities of their existence, laying bare the grim fate that would befall Cody should he ever be exposed. But, akin to human adolescence, Cody harbored a longing for camaraderie and a kinship with those similar to him. In clandestine rebellion against his circumscribed existence, Cody would slip from the confines of their cabin under the cover of night's inky tapestry. Stealthily, he traveled the boundaries of their wooden sanctuary and returned to the town atop the hill his father had shown him. Concealed amidst the shadows or perched upon rooftops, Cody would surreptitiously immerse himself in the townspeople's conversations. This stealthy eavesdropping was his sole connection to the outside world, a world he was barred from but longed to be a part of. The murmured discourse of the townspeople wafted through the night air, each word a tantalizing glimpse into the realm he yearned to join. One fateful night, he overheard the chatter of two farm wives. Hidden amidst the shadows of a storage loft, Cody crouched silently, his breath catching in his throat as he tried to remain undiscovered. Below him, the two women worked late into the night, bathed in the soft orange glow of lantern light. A mound of fresh peaches lay between them, and one by one they skinned the fruits, dropping them into an enormous bubbling pot to reduce them into a compote. As they toiled, they chatted away.
"There was a woman just like that,"
began one, her voice dripping with intrigue.
"Haven't you heard the tale?" "I have heard of the Ordog, of course, but not of anything recent, only myths from long ago,"
the other replied, eagerly awaiting a response. The first woman leaned in conspiratorially.
"Then listen well," she whispered. "In the heart of our very town, there lived a woman named Valerie. Her face was a landscape of oddities, a jutting, pointed chin, a nearly bald head, and eyes that were set so wide apart they seemed to watch the world from two different vantage points. Tall and gaunt, she resembled a lone tree in winter's grasp. Her visage might have drawn pitying glances and hushed chuckles, but her mind was a fortress, sharp and unyielding. Yet behind the walls of that fortress lay a deep abyss of loneliness. And in her yearning, she turned to the legends whispered on nights like this, tales of the Ordog. In their haunting lore, she saw not just a reflection of her plight, but a potential answer. She didn't want the tragic fate of the woman from the myth, who met her demise when birthing the Ordog. No, she was too smart for that. Instead, she sought something more strategic. She wished to become an Ordog herself first, then to become pregnant by the beast. This way, she could live and have a family of her own. She studied forbidden texts, and she learned how to summon the Ordog. In the months that followed her treacherous act of black magic, murmurs began to swirl about her. People noticed her hands were growing into claws, and she covered her legs with long dresses so no one could see her feet. But people claimed they could hear the clop of hooves as she walked. She grew taller, her silhouette more imposing with every moon. And then, as suddenly as her changes began, she vanished. Some claim she retreated to the heart of the forest, where she could raise her freakish brood in peace. The second woman scoffed, breaking the tense silence. "Such fables."
The storyteller's eyes sparkled mischievously. "Ah, but there's one detail that might sway your disbelief," she murmured, dragging out a long pause to ignite suspense. The skeptic listened intently. After waiting in silence for a few moments, she leaned in and asked,
"What?"
The first woman's voice dropped even lower. Soon after Valerie's disappearance, a fearsome woodsman brought the butcher a mysterious prize from his traps. It was the corpse of a female Ordog. Her carcass was secretly sold to the clergy, who roasted her to perfection, served in secret during one of the infamous royal gatherings. The Count, my husband's employer, was present. He confided in my husband about the feast. He still raves about the divine taste of oar-dog meat."
"Absolutely revolting,"
the second woman cried out, followed by a cackle of mischievous laughter from the both of them. From his hiding spot, Cody's heart raced. Tears blurred his vision as he grappled with the ramifications of the tale. His mysterious heritage revealed to him now, like a knife in his guts. He tried to ignore the story as only speculation, but continued his clandestine visits to the town under the cloak of night to learn even more. In light of the old hag's tale, Cody became obsessed with the notion of infiltrating one of these nefarious banquets. By eavesdropping in the town's concealed corners, he gleaned the details of the forthcoming exclusive gathering. That night, brimming with both dread and determination, he made his way to the palatial abode of the town's most opulent salt merchant. Finding solace in the shadowy confines of an enormous cabinet, he peered out at the grandiose banquet hall, which was abuzz with the town's most illustrious figures. The resplendent room was a whirl of color and activity, as the elites of society reveled in their secreted midnight banquet. Their conversations, refined yet superficial, swirled around the prodigious dining table that groaned under the weight of extravagant delicacies. The center of attention was a mythical bird of monumental proportions, its gilded and azure feathers meticulously arranged as ornamental garlands that adorned the table. The bird's colossal, plump body, now a glistening golden brown, sat proudly as the banquet's centerpiece.
"A most exquisite find, this saber pheasant, wouldn't you agree?"
declared an esteemed guest, the bones of the wing delicately held between her gloved fingers.
"It's almost a pity that so few of them remain in the wild,"
chimed in a corpulent clergyman, his tone a nauseating mix of haughty indulgence and faux lament.
"It's quite unsatisfactory,"
agreed a portly nobleman, his obese frame enveloped in an extravagant, plum-hued velvet cloak. As he spoke, his jowls undulated in tandem with his whimpering utterances.
"But alas, it fails to hold a candle to the oar-dog fawns that once adorned our banquet tables so many years ago."
His melancholic sigh resonated through the air, promptly followed by vigorous nods from the surrounding elites, their faces etched with an amalgam of wistful nostalgia and a calculated indifference, as they sought to affirm their lofty status by feigning nonchalance towards the lavish spread before them. Even the Count himself, seated at the head of the table, joined in the chorus of agreement.
"Ah, now that was a true Epicurean indulgence,"
he declared with a flourish. This confirmation of his suspicions that his father was complicit in supplying such forbidden trade to the town's elites sent rage through Cody's veins. His suspicions, once vague and nebulous, now crystallized into an irrefutable truth. The revelation of his past atrocity, a vile feast on his own kin, likely supplied by his own father, was an affront to his very existence. Struggling to contain the wellspring of grief and fury threatening to escape, he bided his time until the revelry waned. Finally, under the cloak of night, he made his surreptitious departure, retreating to the sanctuary of his woodland home. On the way back to the cabin, in the depths of the night, Cody absorbed these fragments of knowledge, connecting the dots of his particular heritage. The oar-dog blood that flowed through his veins, the forbidden union of human and beast, the man he knew as his father, who taught him all he knew and cared for him his whole life, was also the murderer of his mother and siblings. It was a revelation that stirred a mix of rage, sorrow, and an ever-growing resolve within him. From that moment on, his existence became intertwined with a haunting awareness, a profound understanding of his true nature. By the time Cody made it home, he was so filled with rage that he burst through the door of their humble abode, storming towards the tiny kitchen counter where he grabbed a large knife, his eyes filled with both tears and rage. He jumped upon the bed where his father lay. His now large and ox-like legs straddled his father's sleeping body. Arvin, startled from his dream by the sight of his son hovering above him, felt a primal fear seize his very being. A long knife glinted in the dim light, poised above his head, ready to strike. Terror coursed through his veins, his heart pounding like a distant drum. He had never imagined that the boy he had nurtured and loved would ever stand before him as he did now, as a harbinger of death. But as their gaze intertwined, a tragic understanding pierced through Cody's haze of fury. He saw the profound weariness carved into the old man's visage, etched lines spelling out years of regret, silent pleas for forgiveness hovering in the air, a burden that had hung between them, unspoken, yet palatable, for all these years. This tragic tapestry of guilt was now laid before Cody to see, a sorrowful truth his innocence had previously obscured. In that suspended moment, Cody's arm faltered, the knife trembling in his grasp. The love that had been forged through years of shared existence surged through his veins, overriding the rage that had consumed him. He could not bring himself to strike down the man who had been his father in all but blood. The room was steeped in a heavy silence, interrupted only by their uneven breaths. Echoing the turmoil within, in the midst of this charged stillness, Cody emitted a heart-wrenching cry, a sound so raw and desperate that it needed no words to convey his plea. As the sound washed over him, tears pooled in the old man's eyes, a poignant reflection of his understanding. Years of unspoken communication allowed him to read his boy's thoughts without words. He knew the source of Cody's rage. His darkest secret had been revealed. "I deserve death," Arvin said solemnly. "And now that you know the truth, you will abandon me. In the face of that, put me out of my misery," he pleaded. "I prefer death to that," the old man said. And tears flowed from both eyes in a steady stream. Arvin braced himself for the punishment he believed was his due. In the flickering light, he nodded his head reassuringly. He was prepared to face the consequences of his actions. But the blow never came. Instead, in the darkness of their shared pain and regret, the bond that had weathered the storms of their existence was too deep. Cody, overwhelmed by a mixture of emotions, lowered the knife, his trembling hand releasing its grip. It fell to the floor with a clatter. Cody stood and jumped from the bed, running for the door of the cabin. He left Arvin and disappeared into the depths of the night, into the forest beyond. At the same moment, Arvin raced to the door, but the old man was no match for Cody's youthful speed. Realizing that any pursuit would be useless, he stopped at the doorway, looking out into the trees beyond their little porch. He cried out in anguish, a ghostly echo of his boy's name, into the night air. Again and again he cried out, pleading for Cody to return. But there was no answer, no sign that his beloved son would return. The wilderness swallowed him whole, leaving Arvin alone, calling out into the emptiness for hours until his voice left him, until he collapsed on the floorboards in the front of his doorway. In the following months, a relentless onslaught of torment befell Arvin, plunging him deeper into a realm of darkness and despair. Each attempt to gather wood or set a trap became an exercise in futility, as if an unseen malevolence conspired to thwart his every move. Sturdy logs, newly fallen, vanished without a trace, while the traps he so carefully placed would seemingly disappear minutes after they were set. It was as if the world itself had turned against him. He could barely earn a penny to survive. For years, Arvin's heart had been encased in ice, a frigid chamber untouched by warmth. Yet the brief span he'd spent raising his adopted son had kindled a fragile flame within. Now, with Cody gone, the cold seeped back in, intensified by the biting pain of loss. It's often said that the sting of losing something cherished is far worse than never having known it at all. For Arvin, the weight of Cody's absence was a burden too crushing to bear. The forest, once his haven, now stood as a silent witness to his solitude. Despair became his constant shadow, wrapping him in its cold embrace. With his will to live dwindling, Arvin's life spiraled into degradation. The man who once hunted and chopped wood with pride now found himself groveling for mere scraps and stray coins at the town gate. Once respected, or at least feared, Arvin became pitied and a pariah. Whispered tales steeped in pity and superstition followed him like a cloud. Children mocked him from a distance, their parents casting wary eyes, seeing him as a manifestation of ill omens. The town's gate, once open, now shut him out, and the clergy, deeming him tainted, barred him from sacred gatherings. His home, once a snug refuge amidst the wilderness, now bore the scars of neglect. Walls that had sheltered laughter and dreams now sagged with the weight of despair. The once crackling hearth, the heart of his home, stood cold and abandoned. Arvin, in the ruins of what once was, became a spectral figure, a living ghost, lost to the remnants of a life once full. In the depths of his desolation, a flicker of hope was granted. A chance encounter with a mysterious figure ignited a glimmer of hope within Arvin's beleaguered soul. One day, while he was in the woods, an old wandering Taltos reached him, appearing out of the trees. A practitioner of the ancient occult arts, this Taltos held the key to communing with the supernatural. In times past, the appearance of such a foreboding figure would have instilled fear in Arvin's heart, but his current condition left him merely gazing in silent communion as the odd figure materialized from the forest shadow. Wild, unfocused eyes met Arvin's gaze, a mirror reflecting back his own fractured sanity. Here were two souls, both unraveled by their individual torment, each recognizing themselves in the other. The strange man, his body draped in a mosaic of unprocessed animal hides, bore an aroma of decomposition and filth. Amongst his morbid garb, enigmatic symbols and amulets pulsated with an inexplicable energy were woven. A small smile curled at the corners of Arvin's lips as the Taltos made his approach. The two desperate beings drawn together in the obsidian embrace of the woods, their disjointed psyches seeking solace in this unexpected union.
How has one so fearsome as yourself become so pathetic?
The Taltos asked in a grizzled, whispery voice that almost sounded like the wind itself. I lost my son, Arvin replied, and the once menacing man, now so used to begging, raised his hand in a pathetic gesture of a vagrant. The two crazed-looking men stared at each other, eye to eye, in that moment. Silence surrounded them as time lingered. Then the Taltos spoke. I can give you what you need, he replied in a sinister tone. But it is an offer only fit for a man who has nothing to lose. Any other man, given such a response, would have immediately declined, as the intention was clearly malevolent. But Arvin only stared back with hope in his eyes. "You can?" he asked.
"You will have to let go of any prior superstitious beliefs," the Taltos said eagerly. "Everything you previously have been told is forbidden is actually the solution."
The Taltos followed this reply by revealing a large leather-bound book that he concealed under his unusual clothes. Arvin's eyes drifted to the book, fixated on it as though it were made of gold. "This book will help me find my boy?" Arvin replied in a pathetically desperate tone.
"A particular group of pages from this book, yes,"
the Taltos replied.
"A ritual that can summon the forces that you seek."
The insane shaman looked almost afraid to speak the next words.
"An Ordog,"
he replied, much quieter than before. At this, Arvin reached out for the book, but as his hand came close, the Taltos snatched it away.
"Not the whole book, fool,"
he said cruelly.
"You have no concept of what this took to create, but I will give you the portion you require, if you can afford to pay for it,"
he sneered. Arvin was seemingly caught off guard. He paused for a long moment, lost in thought. He could only think of one thing he had of value. "My home," he responded. "It is small and in disrepair, but it's all I have to offer."
"Take me there,"
the Taltos said and smiled broadly as Arvin nodded. Arvin led the wild-looking shaman through the woods toward his home. The pair of men would have been quite the sight if seen by onlookers. Two crazed and disheveled men walking through the forest, with only the sounds of the forest around them and the clang of the Taltos' strange garb. When they reached Arvin's little cabin, the Taltos looked upon it eagerly. They entered the home together. Arvin showed the man all of his belongings pleadingly, seeking the acceptance of the offer. His possessions were meager, and the place was in rough condition, having been neglected for some time now. Arvin had sold most of his furnishings and anything of value to the people in town. All that was left was his bed, a chair, and the cupboards of his tiny kitchen, filled with only a few items. The Taltos inspected the cabin, wandering the floor and looking into the drawers. Then he nodded in approval.
"From one outcast to another,"
the Taltos cackled cynically, and he retrieved the great book from beneath his robe once more, flipping to the center of it. He then tore out 3 pages from its depths and handed them over to Arvin's eager hands. As the pages were transferred from one man to the other, a great howl from some unknown beast came from far off in the woods. Arvin felt a powerful vibration as soon as he held them in his grasp. A paranormal vibration was clearly evident, and he knew the offer he had made was not a fraud. He quickly looked at the contents of those pages. His literacy was rudimentary, but there were many diagrams and simplified vocabulary, implying that the Taltos was of a similar literacy. The most important words to read were the incantation, and this he only needed to be able to sound out, for the language they were written in was clearly not his own. "These pictures show additional items I will need," Arvin said worriedly, realizing he had already offered his home and all of its contents. As if expecting a sudden glimmer of regret, the Taltos spoke once more.
"The consequences of such a ritual are not reversible. Know that once you open such a portal, there will be no turning back."
Arvin hardly listened to his cautionary words. He had only one focus now. Even when the Taltos offered him to stay for the night, Arvin declined. So the Taltos rummaged through the cupboards and removed the items that Arvin would require. The Taltos offered a dagger, a flint, a lantern, and a little pot.
"Take these,"
he said, handing them over.
Search now for a ring of oaks directly north from here. You will know it when you see it. They are like no others, and while you wander, you will need to find nightshade berries," the Taltos instructed, and then handed him one more thing from his own pockets. "Here are the bones of a crow, the main ingredient you will require. Consider it as a final parting gift. The rest is up to you."
Arvin took the items gratefully and left immediately. Walking out the door of his little cabin he had lived in with Cody for so many years, he did not even look back. Now driven by a singular focus, Arvin headed northwards through the dense forest. He did not eat and only drank water from streams. As he wandered, he found a nightshade bush and greedily collected its berries. He walked both day and night, oftentimes doubling back, retracing his steps, ensuring he didn't stray off path for 5 days in a row. Then, he finally stumbled upon the site the Taltos had told him about. Just as the sun's last rays painted the horizon, a foreboding circle of oak trees emerged. Their towering presence cast long, ghostly shadows, and etched upon their ancient trunks were cryptic carvings, relics of forgotten ceremonies. At the heart of this circle sat a pile of cold gray ashes, whispering tales of rituals long past. With unwavering resolve, Arvin set his lantern alight. The flickering glow, hung from a sturdy stick in the clearing's center, pushed back the encroaching darkness. Laying out the time-worn pages, he meticulously went over the ritual steps, ensuring he missed no crucial detail. Taking a deep breath, he sketched a protective circle in the ground. Then, using this same stick, he carefully replicated the symbols represented in the book into the dirt around him. He then ignited a small fire, and using large stones as a base, placed his pot above the flames. Into this pot, he added the nightshade berries and the brittle bones of the crow that the Taltos had provided him with. As the contents hissed and released a thick, eerie smoke, Arvin stilled himself and then began to recite the incantation written on those pages. Zara Kalen Ordoth Ansne, Vithra Ganul, Tharza Vinthe, Narun Zithlar, Karza Lithe, Ordoth Rizna, Zarun Thithe, Marnul Ordoth, Zarnun Dithne. As he spoke these foreign words, sounding them out slowly to get them correct, he raised his left wrist above the small pot that was now sizzling. Using the dagger he had brought, he then slit his wrist, cutting deep into the veins. His blood gushed, and he directed the liquid into the pot. At that same moment, the forest around him seemed to shimmer. The winds began to stir, whispering secrets carried from realms beyond mortal comprehension. The very ground beneath him trembled, as if awakened by the resonance of his words. As Arvin appeared into the depths of the ancient forest around him, his eyes met a haunted spectacle. From the gnarled branches and twisted trunks, a multitude of eyes now loomed, staring back at him, bearing faces of otherworldly continents. Among the eerie gathering, he discerned a towering beast, its hirsute body standing tall on 2 legs, exuding an aura of primal power. Not far from that, a hybrid creature with terrifying features, its countenance a curious blend of reptilian and human form, with strange tattoos inked in the skin of its face. In the shadows, other forms that defied earthly norms emerged, with heads in place of torsos and multiple limbs, some intertwined in unsettling formations. Alongside these, beings of indescribable alienness eluded definition, their shapes hinting at realms beyond human comprehension. These mysterious faces, each unique and unsettling, gazed upon Arvin with an intensity that spoke of ancient enigmas and hidden truths. They formed a congregation of the unknown, an eerie chorus of watchers that beckoned him towards a realm that lay beyond the veil of mortal understanding. Amidst the congregation of spectral faces, Cody emerged, enveloped in an aura of otherworldly majesty. He towered above the gathered spirits, his horns reaching skyward, symbols of his ethereal nature. Arvin's breath caught in his chest as he gazed upon his beloved son, now transformed into a being of fearsome power and authority. Overwhelmed by the magnitude of the moment, Arvin knelt before Cody, a gesture of humility and reverence. His heart pounded with a mixture of awe and trepidation, for he knew that this was a pact that would forever alter his existence. Cody, the Ore-Dog, extended his arms, an invitation for Arvin to embrace his destiny. With unwavering determination and a surge of emotions coursing through his veins, Arvin clasped Cody's clawed hands, sealing their connection. The energies within the sacred circle intensified, their spirits merging in a symphony of light and darkness. A transformation began, transcending the boundaries of mortality and granting Arvin the power of the Ore-Dog. As the ritual reached its zenith, the forest became a stage upon which the realms intertwined. Time stood still, and the mortal and the mystical merged as one. The communication between father and son was sealed. An unbreakable bond would span eternity. The trees seemed to release a sigh of sadness, while other voices laughed and cheered. In the hollowed silence that followed, Arvin rose, his being now interwoven with the essence of the Ore-Dog. The spirits of the forest whispered their approval, their forms fading into the tapestry of shadows. From that moment on, the Ore-Dogs would roam the depths of the forest, and many say they can be seen some nights sitting on the rooftops in the town.